You might think the babification phase is getting a bit out of hand, with the likes of Baby Groot, Baby Yoda, Baby Sonic, and especially...
Is that a baby nut?
I must consume your soul to become a real boy.
But in actuality, this is a phase that has never died. Countless series have suffered the fate of this trend, but the one we'll be focusing on today is A Pup Named Scooby-Doo. The series featured younger versions of the Mystery Inc. cast, tackling all sorts of mysteries they came across in their childhood. Now, Scooby-Doo is no stranger to spin-offs. It's actually hard to keep track of all the ones that exist, though we've covered one of the early 2000 spin-offs on this channel previously. While A Pup Named Scooby-Doo was undoubtedly trying to cash in on that Muppet Baby trend, I think out of every show to attempt it, this one actually made the most sense. Focusing on the Mystery Inc.'s kids' years as they solve much smaller scale mysteries is a neat idea that would definitely be perfect for the much younger audience they were aiming for. The show's main cast remains relatively the same, though there are slight character adjustments. Daphne's a no-nonsense fashion geek, Fred is very impulsive and leaps before he thinks. Velma rarely talks, but uses a well-defined vocabulary when she does. Scooby acts like Scooby, and Shaggy is the hip and trendy kid. They do add a bunch of new side characters too, bringing in the family members of each character, and even introducing a character straight up called Red Herring. A character who is always suspected to be the culprit of every mystery, but only once in this series is he ever really the monster. Conceptually, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo nails what a prequel series should be, but how does it fare in execution? Well, that's what we're going to see in this review. This is A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, a bicycle built for Boo. We start with an absolute banger of a theme song, back when theme songs weren't afraid to go on for a full minute. It's definitely considered one of the better theme songs in this series, and for good reasons too. The episode begins with Shaggy getting ready to deliver papers. That is until Scooby comes across a glob monster who steals Shaggy's bike. Yeah, going from stealing priceless artifacts to a local kid's bike. Times sure have hit these poor villains hard. In any case, Shaggy recruits the other gang members to help track down his stolen bike. Their first subject being the local bully. Red Herring is no stranger to bullying the other kids around the block, so they sneak over to his hideout to find Shaggy's bike. They end up discovering a bike, though after Fred grinds it with a sandblaster, they realize it was Red's bike after all. After a well-deserved beating, the gang decides to go with the more obvious solution of following the tracks left by Shaggy's bike. We see their version of the Mystery Machine is a souped-up skateboard with an engine. Also, now may be the best time to talk about this show's soundtrack. Obviously, it's a very 80s style soundtrack. It sounds about what you'd expect it to sound like, but there are two other aspects of this soundtrack that's interesting. Some of the show's soundtrack, primarily during the monster chases, was inspired by 1950s rock. This is interesting, as the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You took place during the 1960s, so it's a clever way to indicate when the show takes place. The second interesting aspect is the use of a cappella. Every now and then, the music will switch to being entirely done by a cappella, and it's really well done. I've looked all around, but I haven't been able to find exactly who provided the a cappella soundtrack, so I'm sorry for not being able to provide you with that info here. Still feel free to look it up in your free time. I would honestly be interested in any of your findings, so please leave them down in the comments. Getting back to the plot, the gang tracks Shaggy's bike back to the printing company he delivers for. Shaggy's boss says he has nothing to do with it, but considering he is only one of two other suspects in this episode, it's pretty much a given who the culprit is. Also, it's here I realize these kids kind of cause more problems than they solve. Following the scene where Fred scrapes off the paint of an innocent kid's bike, Scooby ends up causing a ruckus in the printing press. They rightfully are told to leave the premises, so Scooby leads them to their next destination, an abandoned mansion. We're really stretching just how far this missing bike case can go. Though it's here we're introduced to the second culprit of the episode, a sidekick who has no real relevance to the plot other than to scare the kids here. This isn't even her mansion, she just kinda shows up out of nowhere, then leaves just as fast. Despite how obvious the mystery is played out till now, I will give this episode credit for the motive of stealing the bike was very unexpected. As the gang enters the mansion, they stumble into a basement full of money, but as it turns out, all of the money is counterfeit currency. The monster enters the room and scares them further down into the basement, where they discover a lone printing press as well as Shaggy's bike. It turns out the chain from Shaggy's bike was removed and placed onto the printing press, but before the gang can figure out the rest, the monster chases them into a good old-fashioned Scooby-Doo montage. The monster gets trapped in its own printing press, revealing it to be none other than Shaggy's boss. While the reveal of this mystery was as predictable as it gets, I will give them credit that everything else was actually well thought out. The printing press needed a special chain, which Shaggy's bike just so happened to have. So he didn't just take a random kid's bike, he saw Shaggy's bike before and knew his address so he could steal it. He also used his position in the printing company as a cover-up, while he would use the ordinary supplies to produce his counterfeit currency. And the psychic from earlier, who had no relevance to the plot, wasn't really a psychic. She was an undercover agent from the Treasury Department. All in all, the mystery this time had some very unexpected twists and turns, even if the reveal itself was very predictable. But in the end, Shaggy's boss gets taken away, Shaggy gets his bike back, and it ends with another mystery solved, and that was a pup named Scooby-Doo. An all-around clever concept with an okay execution. This show is obviously meant for a younger audience, so if you go in with that in mind, you may enjoy it. While at times the show feels predictable, it actually has some clever twists and turns to it. The one negative I'll give to it is that the show feels too dated in some places. Sometimes it can get a bit too carried away with the 80s lingo.
Scoob, no sleeping in my bed, Mom will have a cow!
And it also likes to make a ton of references to 80s pop culture. While it doesn't have too many dated moments, at least during my time watching it, when it does have those moments, it feels like the equivalent to the 90s dated shows like Quack Pack. I would say it's a product of its time, but it's still very enjoyable by today's standards. I think the biggest benefit of this show is the respect for the source material. You could compare this to the remakes on television today, such as Thundercats Roar or the 2016 Powerpuff Girl reboot, and you can appreciate just how much the team working on the show cared about the source material in comparison. Before doing this review, I assumed that the Scooby-Doo fandom would have looked down on this spinoff, but as it turns out, a majority of fans I've seen really love this entry in the series. I remember loving it as a kid, and revisiting it once more, I see why I enjoyed it so much, and I see why the fandom seems to love it. So with all that said, I think I could recommend this series today, especially to those looking for a good Scooby-Doo spinoff to check out. There is one other one I'd love to recommend, but that is a review for another day. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this review. If you enjoyed the video and would like to support future reviews, then be sure to hit that subscribe button as that helps us out a ton. Until next time.